Good morning, wonderful Wy'East congregation. I'm Ava Colopy, a teacher and sometimes a writer. I used to go to Wy'East years ago before I moved to Ireland. I lived, worked, and studied in Ireland for a number of years, and I have been living in Arkansas for the past 3 years and teaching here. I was invited by the lovely Mark Alter to answer a few questions that had been passed on to him, which I very much appreciate. But of course, being Irish, we are very wonderful storytellers, which can be a nice way of saying we sometimes never shut up. So my answers may be a bit long, but it was the only way that I felt I could really answer the questions fully. Simple question: what is it like to live there? And you'll see how Irish my answer is. I personally have found Southerners to be very warm and accepting, despite all the hateful anti-Southern views I was raised with in the North, that as far as I know, everyone in the North is raised with. I have not seen much racism myself, but I'm aware that it's around in this country. And by being white, you can accidentally have blinders onto it, because unless you go around the country with an African-American person next to you, you won't necessarily know if you're talking to someone who's racist or not. And you can assume people you're meeting have the same values that you do, and they may not. My boyfriend and his father both served in the military, and they served with people of all different skin colors, so to them it doesn't matter. They're not racist, they don't have that prejudice. And my boyfriend served in Iraq with women and considers women to be equal. If they had a certain rank, they are equal. So the people I've been around have not been prejudiced. In my experience, in the North, we're taught that Southerners are stupid, ignorant, racist, backwards, and that they all supported slavery. These are mostly ignorant and false statements. Southerners are generally polite and helpful. If your car breaks down, especially as a woman, you will receive help immediately. I swear it is if rednecks in pickup trucks have radar for motorists in despair. Unless you're on the freeway, that's different, but otherwise you're going to get help. Many Southerners did not support slavery. They supported keeping the North from policing their area. In regards to the Civil War and the South's then economic dependence on the horrific practice of having human beings as slaves, I'm wondering now why the North didn't at that time help the South find another way. Instead of basically bullying the South into submission, the North could have offered to help Southerners build factories or find other ways of making money that didn't depend on the horrific practice of slavery. The North did not care about bankrupting the South. The North should have tried to be a better fellow American rather than simply bankrupt the South. Now, slavery absolutely needed to end, there's no question about that. But the North definitely did not care about leaving the South destitute, and that is no way to treat your fellow citizens of your own same country. Sadly, yes, there has been a great deal of racism in the South and in the North. No one should try to deny that, but it is not accurate to lump all Southerners in the same category and refuse to get to know anything about these people. Of course, no Colopys were involved in that conflict. The Colopys were in Ireland trying not to starve to death. I do not have very deep roots in the New World myself. I know 3 of my great-grandparents were immigrants from Sweden, one of which had heritage going back to Czechoslovakia. One was an immigrant from Germany. One was first-generation Irish-American. One was at least first-generation Scottish-American, and the other 2 I don't know about. I've noticed that U.S. Americans with deeper roots in the U.S. tend to get more emotional about all of this and act as if they need to justify the decisions their ancestors made that may have been bad decisions, like risking a civil war rather than helping people not be economically dependent on slavery. I think this can show us and teach us that there is almost always, if not always, a better solution than going to war. My father always used to say what we need for world peace is trade and diplomacy. I have been treated very well while here, and Southerners tend to have good manners. They say ma'am and sir and get the door for you. It's been difficult for me trying to remember to say ma'am and sir all the time so that I don't come off as rude or brusque or disrespectful. In the North, we tend to value efficiency, greater efficiency in our social interactions, kind of like we're all Germans and we run factories. Southerners are more willing, in my experience, to take their time and have a chat. It's closer to Irish culture in that way. The South may seem uninviting to those who run counter to their values. I moved to Arkansas to help my family, so I was never treated like an outsider or someone who shouldn't be here. They can be wary of strangers, since the last time a great many Northerners came, it was to take advantage of a war-ravaged region in desperate times. Having lived here, I don't think the so-called Reconstruction actually reconstructed anything. I think it was focused on keeping the South from having the means to ever rise again. Although the protection the Northern troops offered to the recently freed slaves was a very good thing, as far as I can tell, that was the only good they actually did, from what I've heard, what I've read, and what they've told me in the oral tradition of the area. Further, they don't want outsiders to come here and try to change everything. They have a saying, "Don't California my Texas." They're fine with Northerners moving here to have better lives if they can have one, but they don't want an outsider moving in and then complaining about everything and trying to change everything to how it is where they just came from. If that's how people are, they would rather they not come here, which makes complete sense and is exactly what my view was when I lived up in Mount Hood, where I'm from, and there'd be some city folk who'd move in, kill all the trees on their property, and then complain about the lack of stores and strip malls in the woods. Some people I know who live in a rural part of the Ozark mountain region where hunting and fishing and using the meat from those kills to feed your family is a traditional way of life, and those are proud traditions that have been passed down through the generations. They're skills they've passed down. They had a Californian move in next door and complain one day when they had a deer strung up to clean it, which means that they skin it and they gut it and they take everything out they don't need and try to use as much meat as they can. The Californian said it offended him. They thought if he was going to be that way, that was ridiculous and he should just leave then. He was acting like he didn't know where he was. And I would say they were completely right in this, because that's their part of the world and those are their traditions. They've always lived this way. I have found Southerners more honest about their history than Northerners in my experience. In Oregon, I was told about the Corps of Discovery and the Oregon Trail. I was not told that European diseases killed most of the native people, or that to avoid getting involved in the Civil War, Oregon once banned African Americans, and that was added to the Constitution. That has since been taken out of the state constitution and has been blacked out. Here, Southerners never tried to hide the Trail of Tears or the history of slavery or anything else that happened. So I don't like being lied to or having big things kept from me, so I have appreciated the honesty. And by the way, none of my ancestors were in Oregon when that was happening. They weren't there yet. It can be difficult to live in a place with so little infrastructure and obvious long-term economic disadvantages. There is little public transport, there is almost no train or Greyhound bus coverage in the area. Roads have generally not been made by good engineers, so those tilts and dips that roads have in Oregon to drain all the water off of them, they generally don't have that here. So the water tends to puddle down the roads and you're more likely to hydroplane and have other issues than in Oregon, where you typically don't have the road flooding because the roads were built properly. So a huge problem here is the long-term lack of investment. And when you go to Fayetteville, you see a city down here that can be very nice when somebody actually invests in it. The public library in Fayetteville is huge, it's clean. I swear you walk in and you want to live there. They have one room in particular that's for the kids, and it is giant. It has tons of books. It's very colorful, and it literally has airplanes hanging from the ceilings. Not models, but real airplanes. It is a very cool room. The pedestrian trails in Fayetteville are paved. They have stonework as well. They're landscaped very nicely, so walking along them is very inviting. It's very pretty. It's a very enjoyable experience. So the Walton family of Walmart fame has invested in the area. Regardless of anyone's view on Walmart, including my own, you can see how much the area has benefited from someone caring enough to invest in it. It is a free-thinking college town, so those of us that are more worldly and educated can actually feel really at home in that town. Sadly, much of the South has not seen the benefits of any real investment, especially in education. And the people know this. They can tell that they're not a priority. Young people here know that they're not a priority. Arkansans don't feel pride in being Arkansans, generally speaking, which I consider bad for their psyches and general well-being. I grew up feeling very proud of being an Oregonian and proud of my Irish and other heritage. I think it is good to feel pride in your heritage, both in geographic and genetic. I don't think it's good to grow up not feeling proud of your roots. I try to give my high school students here something to feel proud of. Maya Angelou, the brilliant poet and storyteller, spent some of her childhood in Stamps, Arkansas. General Douglas MacArthur, the World War II hero, was born in Arkansas. Former US President Clinton, a corrupt politician who sold jobs out in the 1990s, he came from Arkansas. He brokered the Good Friday Agreement in Ireland to end the tit-for-tat sectarian violence during the Troubles in Ireland. I try to find something for them to be proud of, but they're generally not proud of where they're from, and they know their nation doesn't care about them or their futures. They know they're not a priority here. It can be quite depressing, but all you can do is go in every day and encourage them. An interesting thing about living and working here is the experience of, at times, being in a town that has more blacks than whites. Growing up white in Oregon, you don't experience being a racial minority in any place. In the first 15 years of my life, growing up in Clackamas County, I saw 3 non-white people in Clackamas County. 1 Mexican immigrant in Brightwood and 2 lovely black girls with these long, beautiful braids in Oregon City. And I did not grow up knowing that Clackamas and Multnomah were American Indian names. Here in places like Jacksonville, Arkansas, and Atlanta, Georgia, you're the minority. I currently work in a school where the head principal and superintendent are African American. The majority of the people who live in the town are African American. Middle-aged and older residents usually act weary of a white person when I'm out in public, and with good reason. If you know the history, you know blacks here don't have a reason to trust whites in this country in general, despite some whites supporting abolition and later the civil rights movement. My African American students, I think largely because they've grown up seeing some white people support the Black Lives Matter movement, and they've had these white teachers in the school maybe, they act less weary of whites. Please note, for those that didn't understand it, Black Lives Matter wasn't about trying to say that Black lives mattered more than anyone else. It was really saying, because you are acting as if Black lives do not matter, we're going to come out and say that Black lives matter. They weren't saying that their lives mattered more. They were pointing out that they were being treated as if their lives didn't matter, just in case anyone didn't get that. There are parts of this town where I work right now that I try to avoid, not because I've actually felt in danger when I'm there, just that I feel like I'm intruding on somebody else's space. African Americans in this country have so little of anywhere that's really theirs, where they can really feel like they can be themselves and express themselves and they have their own space, that I think they just don't really want an outsider. And I'm not from the area anyway, so I don't want to intrude on their space. So I try to stay out of there. There's no trust, and that makes sense if you know the history. The main thing I was hired to do in this school year here in Jacksonville is teach African American history. Since they couldn't get the ideal for this, a black social studies teacher, they tried to find someone with a multicultural background, and I was the most multicultural person they could find because I taught the English language to learners from all over the world when I was in Ireland. I'm proud that I've yet to hear any complaints from anyone about the work I've been doing teaching this history class. and history is what I wanted to teach. The other subjects I've taught were assigned to me, so I do the best I can with them, but they aren't subjects I love. Civics, for example, is not a subject I love teaching, even though it is important. What is it like to teach there? The hardest thing about teaching in Arkansas is how little education is valued by those in power, and how little parents these days care about education or teaching their kids rules, boundaries, manners, and respect. Though I admit this is sometimes due to them having to work 2 and 3 jobs and being too exhausted when they get home to have the run of their household. The total lack of any support for educators. For example, we have no books or online courses to teach with. We have to make or buy all of our own teaching materials, hence the rise of the website teacherspayteachers.com, which I now sometimes sell materials, not really to make money, but to help my fellow educators. But materials posted for free generally are not downloaded because people assume if you don't put a price on it that it's not really worth anything in our hyper-capitalist society. And the depressing sense that most of the kids themselves don't believe they have a future. Between El Dorado, yes, that's how they pronounce it, where I taught last year, and Jacksonville, it's even worse in Jacksonville. Most of these kids act like they've already given up. This is because many, if not all of the adults they routinely interact with have already given up on them. For example, I had one student recently who would lean back in class, get on her phone, and get mad at me when I told her to sit up, put her phone away, and do her work, and ask me any questions for any help at any time with anything. And she made a point to say or do something rude or disrespectful every single class, every day, every time. I called her mother about her disrespectful behavior. Her mother sounded like she had no idea what to do. I thought, discipline her? That's your job? Make rules, and if she doesn't follow them, enforce consequences like taking her phone away? When I was legal guardian to my grandniece, because, among other reasons, her parents were drug addicts that abandoned her and we were discussing adoption, I once took her phone away for one day, and all her homework was done. All the dishes for the household were washed because that was her assigned chore, and there were about 3 other chores that I never even talked to her about that were done, and she was extremely nice and extremely polite, and I had just a perfect little kid again, and all I had to do was take her phone. It was a specific action I had to take, and it didn't make me popular, but it did correct her behavior and taught her about consequences, and that's being an adult for you. And that's why I bought her a phone, by the way. It was actually just so I'd have something to take away. She didn't know that. I didn't tell her that. That was the only reason I bought her one. But you can't get a lot of these parents today to do their jobs. Some don't even answer the phone when you call. Some will be very rude, some will hang up on you. Some of my colleagues say that some of the parents have cursed at them and then hung up the phone. And many parents will act with their kids as if their kid has a low grade in your class, it is your fault. They and or the parent are saying, why do I have such a low score in your class? Because you're not handing in your work. I've told this to students before, I can't grade work you don't turn in. Parents today are not teaching the kids, a lot of the parents, not all of the parents, are not teaching the kids, it is your job to go to class, sit down, behave as best you can, and actually do the work. And the teacher should offer help and be available to answer questions as needed, but it is actually the student's job, the teenager's job, to go to class, do their work, and give it back to the teacher so the teacher has something to grade. Though in fairness, I'll admit there are those teachers and principals who have their little favorites or the ones they dislike, and that is wrong, and it does play into things. But then that does prepare you for workplaces and office politics. I'm not a favorite where I work right now, so it will help prepare them for that. Many parents today in the West have kids seemingly because they think having a baby will be fun, like a new toy doll, and then they get bored with it partway through the job when they start realizing how much work it is. then they essentially abort their kids in middle school, and by the time we're in high school, we educators have a disaster on our hands. It's like having an oil spill with one or two really caring teachers and one caring principal, and we're trying to clean it up, and we have neither the equipment nor the personnel. Meanwhile, our country's economy is terrible. Our president is mentally unfit for his job, besides having no awareness or connection to what regular working class and middle class US citizens are having to deal with. University fees keep rising, mortgage costs keep rising, and until quote unquote acting right is going to give these kids an actual reward and benefit in life, it's next to impossible to motivate them to behave a certain way in school or care about school, unfortunately. There are solutions, and I have elaborated on them in everything that I was writing up when I started thinking about this, but I don't think we really have the time for all of that. Because like I said, Irish people are excellent communicators, which is a nice way of saying we tend not to shut up. What difference would you like to make? I make whatever difference I can daily. I show up every day and I do my best to be consistent about stating rules and providing real classwork. I am not a very fun teacher with fun activities. We didn't play almost any activity games when I taught economics this school year besides Would You Rather, to help teach them the concept of an opportunity cost, that to have the benefit of one thing, you have to give up the benefit of another thing. I did get my 9th through 12th graders to sit and do an IRS 1040 tax form, and they actually sat still and did it, and they didn't really fight me on it because they liked that I was showing them something they would actually use in the real world, and that I was showing them that little bit of respect. They're always trying to get some respect like adults are supposed to have. And I said, well, here, we're going to do something that you're going to have to do very shortly while you're still in high school or pretty much immediately afterwards. And they actually appreciated that because I was treating them like pre-adults and not kids. So we did that in economics and personal finance because I don't like edutainment. I actually took a Spanish class before that was a lot of fun. We had all kinds of fun and did all these different activities, and I learned maybe 2 new words of Spanish that I didn't know before, and forgot everything else because that's edutainment. That's not education. And anytime I state a rule in class, I'll then say something such as, and these are the rules because this is how it works in a modern workplace. And if I'm not going to prepare you how to function in a modern workplace, then what's the point of the school? That is one of our main jobs. That's one of my main jobs as a teacher. So by doing this, I'm making it about them, and they're getting the message that they matter. You don't come into my classroom and follow my rules because I want to be a raging egotist and a bully to you. You come in, these are the rules, you have to follow these rules because then you'll be able to function in a job. And if I can't get you to function in a way where you could function in a job, I will actually be worried about you. And I don't need the stress. And that makes it about them and what's beneficial to them rather than making it about me. And I always try to get that message through to them. I see you and you matter. So when we had this 18-year-old girl who'd been in the foster system and she just dropped out of high school. So I sent her an email. It was all I could do. I sent an email and said, well, make sure that you do a GED so you've at least finished the 12th grade and been done with that. You may need this later. If you don't have that 12th grade education, there'll be a lot of jobs you can't get. So hopefully she got that email and got the message. Well, there was at least one adult that actually did care. Sadly, her parents didn't seem to. I doubt if she left much of an impression on anyone in the school because she almost never showed up, but I tried to get that message through. Well, at least one person noticed you and cares enough to tell you. Make sure to get that GED. When one boy got expelled from school, I still made sure to send him an email and an email to the emails that were in eSchool. And it turned out that was his mother that I didn't hear from, and his grandmother, who thanked me when I said, he's actually a really smart kid despite the behavior issues. Please make sure as best you can that he's still going to have a future. Don't give up on your future because you're a really smart kid. So hopefully that message got through. Somebody noticed, somebody cared, you do matter. A lot of these kids are not getting that message at home, so I always try to make sure to be that one adult that gives them that message that they do matter. And if they're not getting that message, I of course get very worried, because feeling that they don't matter is the doorway to all bad behavior, from drugs to bad sexual relationships to self-harm to suicidal ideation. And hopefully we can help keep them from doing that by at least having one person give them that message: you were noticed, somebody cared, you do matter. That could save a life, but it is also a huge and exhausting responsibility. That is a part of why so many teachers are burning out so quickly these days, because if parents aren't doing the job, it's too much put on you all the time. But I'll give you an example. The girl I mentioned earlier, she snapped at me and said to leave her alone because she acts like that in all of her classes and no one says anything. And I said, well, those are their classes. This is my class. I have a different standard here. And I said, sadly, that means they've given up, and I haven't. So I'm going to get on your case every day. And, you know, she, of course, threw a fit and everything like that. But a lot of these kids, in a day or two, they come back and they're actually surprisingly nice to you, because you're doing what an adult should do. You're showing that you care. You're making them a priority. You're showing them that they do matter to you. So she did the same thing too. Where lately, some other efforts that I made for her, now she's actually being kind of nice to me and doesn't make a point to be bratty or disrespectful every single class, because she sees I'm not like some teachers you met who just make the rules about the rules because it's about them or their ego. I'm actually trying to help you. At some point, they hopefully get that message across. You know, teens will rebel against you when you're trying to put rules in, but as long as you're making it about actually trying to help them, you're always going to win out in the end. You're always going to be the one who's in the right. But like I said, it does make you experience burnout rapidly. So I've already made plans to return to Europe later this year, partly because this is too much. It's too much of a mess, the public school system right now. And at this point, honestly, I think we should invite some people from a country that has a functioning education system, such as Japan or Ireland, and have them just completely rework what we have going on in this country. Because what we have is, calling it a disaster would be too nice a thing to say about it. So lastly, on that point, I've had a conversation with several of my classes last year and this year about the whole respect issue, how everyone's saying, kids today, they don't show any respect for adults. And I've said, well, a big part of the problem is adults who don't act respectable. So I said that I have a certain job title and I'm older than you is irrelevant, that I come in every day and I do my job and I do the best I can, that I'm behaving a certain way. I watch my manners. I don't yell at students even when I'm frustrated with them. I act as much of a professional as I can under the circumstances. Those are reasons why I ultimately get respect from the kids. And I said, if adults aren't going to hold up their end of the bargain, I don't expect you to respect them. Because this is a social contract, and I have to first hold up my end of the bargain and act respectable to then get the respect. And they've all agreed with that. What difference are you able to make? By consistently modeling good adult behavior as best I can every day and providing real educational materials and making them write all the tasks by hand so they can't copy and paste on a Chromebook. I'm sending the message that every student is cared about, their education matters, every last one of them is noticed, for good or bad, they will be noticed. They're not ignored or forgotten in my classroom. I am able to demonstrate good principles of being an adult, of being a student who's in training to be an adult, of education, of manners, of standards in our society in general. I do the best I can with what I have to work with every day, despite the lack of books or other materials. And where I work now, if you use too much printer paper, you're going to hear about it from central office, because they don't want you using printer paper. They think it costs too much. Apparently they don't know that it costs money to use electricity to charge a Chromebook. Most of the students I taught were on level. I haven't been teaching advanced placement, or basically college prep classes. And generally, a lot of these students cannot actually look at a whole page of text. It seems to make their brain shut down, so I chunk the text into different chunks, and I say, well, read one paragraph at a time, or I'll actually copy and paste an article into a Word document and put questions after each paragraph, so I'm blocking it into chunks. This is a generation who's so used to texting, it seems really hard for a lot of them to read a whole page And when they have families where they don't read books at home, this is a major issue. So I chunk it into pieces. Writing skills are very poor, which is part of why I make them all write by hand. A few of them hate it, but a lot of them actually like it. They prefer not having to mess around with the Chromebook. The Chromebooks are forever malfunctioning. And I've noticed a psychological and emotional difference where if all the work is posted in the Google Classroom and you didn't have to spend any extra time on it, they feel like you're one of those teachers that doesn't care. When you give them a paper copy that you had to print and staple, they feel more like, oh, you actually care. You actually had to at least spend a few minutes on it prepping this material so we'd have a physical copy. And by having their work written down, it makes it so I can check literacy level, spelling, grammar, punctuation, all of which are generally very poor. But anyway, that's not their fault because teachers haven't been doing their jobs. But in any event, it really gives me the ability to actually help them learn. And lastly, I think you should have asked about traveling here to the South. In my experience, Northerners always act as if it would be terrible to be anywhere in the South, but that is not so. New Orleans, for example, is a wonderful city to visit. It is very live and it has a lot of live music venues. If you go down to Bourbon Street at night, you'll have all these different live music venues you can walk in and out of, and there's all this beautiful music pouring into the street, and they also have really good food. Savannah, Georgia is a very nice city. It is quieter and less gritty than New Orleans can be, and it has some very nice houses, and it's near this nice beach, and there's art museums there, for example. It's very enjoyable. Memphis and Nashville are worth seeing, though Memphis can be dangerous at night, and I would tell you to be careful of that. It has a rock and roll museum, a street art mural on the sides of buildings, and other things worth seeing. Arkansas itself is a very rough place, and it's not for everyone. There isn't much to do here besides outdoor pursuits in the Ozarks. I'm of course drawn to the Ozark region because it's mountainous and green, like the stunningly gorgeous part of Oregon that I'm from, like I mentioned, up by Mount Hood. There isn't as much to do here as in Portland, but Little Rock does have some good art museums, a good military museum largely dedicated to General MacArthur, and some good pub-like bars, some good live music venues. I would not recommend walking around Little Rock at night though, especially unarmed, but these days you could say that about Portland or any major city in the US. Jacksonville is a good military museum, and one of its regular volunteers was nice enough to even take me on a tour of Jacksonville's Air Force Base one time, and they have all these different airplanes out on display, which is great. There's no beach in Arkansas, of course, which is very weird to me because I've never lived this far inland before. I've been to Holly Beach in Louisiana, which was nice, though not much to do there. And Corpus Christi, Texas, which is a very chill coastal town that I really liked. And Austin and San Antonio are great as long as you don't mind loud, crowded cities with lots of traffic. The South is the birthplace of what is considered American music because of the African influence. That was all from the Africans, just like the food here being so different and having the flavor, that's from the Africans. White people generally have bland food, but non-whites generally won't. Southern food tastes like flavor, and after you've lived here for a while, you'll just associate it with being bland and not very unique and different because it is mostly European food. It's definitely worth visiting the South, especially the above-mentioned cities. But it's also good to visit as a Northerner, so you get a real sense of the place and its people, so you'll just be less prejudiced against Southerners. Prejudice is generally ignorance. It comes from not knowing a people or their experience. Lastly, I would like to point out that when Northerners make general, sweeping, typically hateful and negative generalizations about Southerners, they never seem to consider that Southerners include many African Americans and many Latin people. Usually when Northerners talk about Southerners, they're talking about white Southerners, but they're actually talking about fictional people that they made up in their heads because most of them haven't actually spent time with Southerners and certainly not spent time in a whole town full of Southerners. So they actually have no idea what or whom they're talking about. It is very important to gain awareness of how easy it is for any of us to be prejudiced. And the remedy for this malady is, of course, always reading more, traveling more, getting more education, more awareness of the world outside of what we've been raised with. Can you even imagine what I'd be like today if I had never left Clackamas County, Oregon? Because at this point, I can't. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day in beautiful Portland, Oregon.